This is way too loud. Okay, hopefully that's better. And now you should have your presentation on that flash, right?
Is it on here? Right.
It's going to be. Is it plugged in? No, it's not. Oh, wait, there it is. USB drive D. There you go.
And
Right. What was the whole setting of the room like this?
yeah, it came in like this.
Oh, I think someone.
Oh, sure. Also, I couldn't figure out how to get these windows open. I think it would be nice to have them open.
Actually, I think was for presentation. That's right.
I don't know. Okay, too. Oh, okay.
You also see yourself in the screen.
No, but once you hang on a second.
All right.
Okay.
It should work. Now, only the people are already. I just know that people should start joining, and then we need to accept their.
Yeah. Okay.
That will probably start joining in a few minutes. Is it all set now, or for you, or you?
I think so. I mean, generally. So we can share the screen. We can go to that.
All right. I think that will also change. Yeah, so can you do it just before the start of the first? Yeah, that's great. Because it seems that already there are so much people in the waiting room.
Okay. We can get John to be the.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Yeah. Because it's kind of difficult to
do that. You do it from down here. You look at the list of participants, and then you kind of click on them, make them co-host.
Yeah,
dead easy.
I mean, a lot of experience.
We did a seminar in Alexandria just before Christmas, just like this with Zoom, and it was kind of, yeah, I had people from giving papers from America and all over Europe and Egypt. There's a,
did everything technically?
Apart from forgetting press record, you know, rubbish internet connections between Egypt and the UK, or the UK and America. But other than that, it was relatively okay.
Are you joining in? Joining in? Yeah. In the group chat, and I think. Was it a game or just training?
That was a game. Did you win? We did.
Right, here we go. Geronimo, and I will Let me see. Yeah, now you should be able to admit people from waiting room to join us.
Do you want me to send those?
No, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
I will email this.
Yeah, maybe somebody's like forwarded it to somebody else, but I don't see that happening.
Also some students involved in the excavation.
Some tasks.
Right.
Not for the past few years. We've been concentrating mainly on first excavation.
So were they also doing the
Yeah.
Is it necessary to undertake some kind of specializing course to be able to do it, or kind of under supervision?
Well, you need to be able to start it, so you don't like then some
Oh, you don't know.
Oh, really?
Basically, I'll show you. The difference is that
Does it take so long as well? Do you have to be so precise?
because you're obviously you're in a state so where we're doing relatively shallow, you don't necessarily work, which is why actually excavating smaller is better because you're able to
Yeah, see the progress. Well, I think we will give people some few more minutes. Oh. So do you also read the course of Maritime, the option paper on Maritime? Correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think I saw that it's only every second year that it's possible to take part in it.
It's every year, but the lectures, because they're from so there's lectures in Hillary. There used to be lectures in Hillary, but now there are only lectures in Hillary. And so 1 year, and do the first group of and then the next year, second. But usually for
So it's not like we are excavating for 1 year.
Unfortunately not. Yeah. Excavations are going on still at the moment. Last week, the week before, and they've gone to see what you found. So it would be great to go to spend the entire term there.
Is it also bound to specific seasons or excavator?
No, that's it's quite shallow. You have to go before when it's low, so and you can't go into too low because all the algae from the water, so you can see. So there's a couple of short windows. Back now, and then in September, October. Otherwise, you can't get in. You basically.
Yeah. I think we are good to start. Hopefully, people can hear us. Right. If it's not possible to hear me or something, please just let me know in comments or unmute yourself and let me know. Because probably you wouldn't be able to hear this, but I hope someone would indicate that you can't. Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome after Easter break into Trinity Term 2022. I'm very excited and happy to hold this kind of hybrid type of meeting for the first time with our today's guest speaker in person. So I hope it will all go well. Please, if there would be any technical difficulties or some problems, let us know and we'll try to troubleshoot it probably after the talk, but at least we will know for the next time. So our today's speaker is Dr. Damian Robinson, and he's director of Oxford Center for Maritime Archaeology. He's specializing on Mediterranean maritime archaeology and urbanizations in complex societies. And he's also in charge of excavation of Egyptian ships dated the 5th century BC from Heracleion and Alexandria, which we'll hear more in this talk. So without any further ado, I'm leaving finally not this virtual stage, but this real stage to our guest speaker.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Right. So I can see that, but everybody, does that work for everybody virtually? The screen's not showing, okay. Let's go. So, share screen. Okay. I think I've shared it.
It's showing the whole, it's blue.
It's loading. Okay. Okay, so that's the next one.
Oh, no, sorry. It's just showing, it's showing the whole software. It's not PowerPoint, and the whole edit.
Okay.
Maybe if you share the screen rather than the window.
Let's turn. So if we stop sharing. Okay, we'll have another go. So, share screen. Share the PowerPoint. Do you want that one? Should try that one. Someone want?
Yeah. Yeah.
You people read along. Hang on, let's just. Okay. I'll just make it up as I go along then. Okay. What you can see here, this is a view across what's called the Port of Magnus in Alexandria. So this is the great eastern port of the city. It's a typical scene just in the lee of what's called Pharos Island. So Pharos Island is known in the ancient literature. It goes back to the Homeric period. Herodotus talked about it, those sorts of things. It's the site of theoretically the famous lighthouse of Alexandria, built on Pharos Island. And today, you see this kind of scene of small boats which are hiding in the lee of it, taking shelter in the lee of it. So they're little fishing boats, and there's a couple of kind of bigger offshore trawlers within this. The fishing boats also act as pleasure vessels every now and again as well. And then in the background, this is our research, the Princess Duda in the back. So it's a pretty typical scene of an everyday harbour in in Alexandria. But these sorts of small boats would be quite common in the ancient world. They would have been in every single harbour, well, apart from research ships, obviously. But in the archaeological records, we don't actually find the small boats that often. And so what I'm going to do in tonight's lecture is really just go through a couple of examples of small boats and talk to you about how we found one of them in this particular harbour, what they mean, and what kind of stories they have to tell us about seafaring life in the ancient world. So that's the kind of the idea. Okay. Let's press that button. Okay, now the thing is,
Yeah, maybe if you take the chairs down.
should I sit down? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, is this better? Do we think?
Some people want to say whether it's better. Yeah.
Okay, so the thing, when we think about the Great Harbour in Alexandria, two sorts of vessels kind of come to mind, and these are, by and large, the largest ships that ever existed in the ancient world. They include this one on the right hand side. Anyway, the picture of the ship. This is the Tessa Cantares. It's a 40. It's so big. It's the biggest machine that's made in the ancient world. It's the biggest wooden ship potentially that's ever been made. It was truly vast. And if you read the quote from Plutarch, he talks about it being rowed by 4,000 rowers, as well as having something like 400 sailors to sail it, 3,000 soldiers to fight upon its decks. It's a truly enormous ship that's built in the time of Ptolemy III Philopator. What this actually is a symbol of his wealth, his status, and the power of Egypt. Plutarch then goes on to say that it actually acts more like an island than a ship. It doesn't, and it's never used in battle, but it's just a demonstration piece. Truly, truly enormous. The other great set of ships that we think about when we think about the harbour in Alexandria is the grain fleet. So the grain from Egypt is sent to Rome as part of the great Annona shipments. And these were on, again, some of the largest trading ships that were built in the ancient world. There's a reference to a journey to Rome on one of these vessels where there was something like 300 passengers as well as the cargo of grain on it. So again, truly enormous ships. And so within all of this, we don't actually talk that much about the smaller ships and boats that went into harbours like Alexandria. And this has been brought up by this book, so Roman Seas, which came out in 2020 by Justin Leidwanger. And within that, what he actually says is, you know, the vast majority of ships from the ancient world wouldn't have been going on these long distance routes from Ostia to Rome. What they would have been doing is going around a small local area, carrying regional produce to other neighboring locations. And as a result of that, this is all part of what Horden and Purcell in The Corrupting Sea, they talk about the sort of Brownian motion of small scale trade around the Mediterranean. And Leidwanger is all about, well, we should actually be looking for that. But even at that level, small boats, small ships, you know, they're just not within that picture either. So how can we look for them? Well, it's really a question of archaeological visibility. Traditionally, what we've done is we've looked for things like this. These are the mounds of amphora that you see on the seabed in traditional shipwreck, hunting, and then excavation. A good map of them is this one above it, which is by Parker. It's from a classic volume where he published about 1,500 shipwrecks from the ancient Mediterranean and plotted their location around the coast. Now, this is obviously a map of archaeological visibility rather than actual, I mean, they are actual wreck sites, but it's more about where we can find them rather than where, well, there's a lot. Anyway, there's a big debate about that, which I make people that do maritime archaeology with me think about. But the issue here is that these are all relatively big wrecks that are found at sea. These are all big trading ships. Again, these aren't the small ships and boats that perhaps we might be interested in. So an example here of one of these smaller ships, smaller boats, is the Napoli Sea wreck. Napoli Sea was discovered in Naples, as you might imagine, and it was found during the construction of a modern metro station. So the ancient harbour had entirely silted up and the city had got built above it. And if we look at where other ships and other small boats have been found in the ancient world, so they've been found in places like Ostia. In the Claudian harbour there's been a range of small boats, 3 or 4 of them discovered, but they were discovered because they were building Fiumicino Airport over the top of it. So again, the harbour had completely silted up. Pisa, there's a collection of small boats from Pisa. And they discovered that because the railway, the Italian railway, were building a new signal box, and the part of the river that the signal box was going to be built upon was, again, silted up. So actually, these small boats aren't necessarily found at sea, but what they are found is in silted up ancient harbours. So the issue, therefore, is actually we're looking in the wrong place if we want to find these small ships and these small boats. Should we be looking in different sorts of locations? So, how do we apply this then to Alexandria? Alexandria, this great ancient port. What you can see in this particular image is what's called, this is the Portus Magnus, the eastern port, and this is the multi-beam bathymetry. So it's effectively a map of the seabed that we made. And and it's to a resolution of about a couple of centimeters. So you can just zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on this. It's phenomenal resolution. What it shows then is effectively the submerged landforms of the city, well, of the harbour area, and using textual evidence, notably from Strabo, who visited the harbour and sort of talks about various bits of it, we can think about a survey area. So this is the survey area that I've just come back from. So we're just the yellow box, essentially. And within that, we have the Port of the Galleys, which is up here. So it's got a mole, another mole, and a sort of defended little mole there. So you'd have to row into it. Then you have what's called the military port, which again is protected here by another mole with an entranceway into here. And then we have the Port of the Emporium, and then the Royal Port of Anti-Rhodos Island, which is in here. And it's in the Royal Port of Anti-Rhodos Island that we've actually found a later wreck, another wreck, which rather unimaginatively we call the Anti-Rhodos Island wreck. And there we found it right at the surface. We were actually investigating this, which is a little mole. And as part of that investigation, the shipwreck appeared and was excavated. The thing about this is that it was at the surface. But the question is, even if you zoom in on this, you can't see shipwrecks on the surface, much less small boats. So again, how do we find those? And the answer is this. This is this is what I've been doing for the last couple of weeks. I've been sat on this catamaran, sailing around the harbour in Alexandria. Its research is difficult sometimes, and this was possibly one of the best times that I've had. Anyway, so this is our. It's just amazing. Anyway, this is one of our. We've used this new technique to us, which is called a sub-bottom imager. So essentially a sub-bottom imager uses sonar and it directs pulses of sound energy into the ground, and these penetrate the sediments and are reflected back up from discontinuities in the sediment. So different levels within the seabed. So when you go from the sand to the clays, and then objects within the clays, you get different responses from this. So this thing here are the sonar arrays, which are on the front of the catamaran. You need a catamaran, ideally, for this, because the array sits in between the two bows of the catamaran. This takes it out of the wake and the bubbles, which are created by the bow, because the bubbles really do interfere with the propagation of the sound waves. So you need a very flash catamaran for this. And then above this, it's all GPSed, so we know exactly the location of everything in XY coordinates. Getting the depth of everything is slightly more tricky because obviously the tide comes in and goes out, even in Alexandria. So usually you'd use what's called a differential GPS for this, but that turns out to be a nightmare. So what we did was we used a tide gauge. So the tide gauge essentially measures the depth of the seabed over a fixed point. And then you add that and it all works out marvelously. So the thing is that this is quite a complicated issue because you have to create navigational lines. So we have a navigator who is this chap. He's Hector. So this is Hector and this is Achilles, and they're absolutely their real names. And Hector is essentially the navigator, and he programs the flight path of the boat, and that gets sent up to Achilles, who's in charge of. He's the ship's captain, effectively. He's 19 and does this as a job, or at least sails the catamaran around the Aegean as a job. So he'd never really done archaeological survey before. So these flight paths get sent to him, and he has to get the boat along a straight line. Now, it's kind of difficult in the sea because you've got the wind, the waves, the currents, the movement of other boats. And so actually to steer a straight path within all of this is quite tough, especially when the survey lines that we do are just over a metre apart. And you have to have a sort of 40 centimetre overlap between between adjacent lines so that you get complete coverage, which is kind of tough. And so one of the other jobs of Hector is to make sure that the line paths are quite close enough, the data is collected quite close enough, and so that there aren't big holes with the data. And so often you have to redo lines, you have to go back and fill in the gaps and that sort of thing. So I spent the majority of my time sat here in front of this. So on this screen, you can see there are 6 individual sonar arrays. And so the information comes in across these. And on this screen here, this is the bathymetry with the line track that you're sailing on. And then you have the position of the catamaran on it in real time. So you can see what you're sailing over, and you can see the depth of what's happening. You can see what's coming up in the sonar. So these light colors, this is the surface. So this is the sea, effectively. This is the seabed. And then you're starting to get different things appearing beneath the seabed. So within that, shipwrecks appear at various depths. And you can start to make sense of what's going on. Now, fortunately, Jakob very kindly said I was in charge of the thing, and I'm not. My colleague Frank Godio is in charge of everything, and he sat next to me going, oh, this is this, this is this, this is this. So I learned an enormous amount about the structure of the harbour and what's going on. Now, all of this data that's collected for individual lines is essentially just a slice through the seabed. What this man does is he runs the software to put it all together into cubes. So we get cubic 3-dimensional data. And then from that, you can kind of use this bit of software to view the different strata and the things that are appearing within it in the data set. And it's there that you actually start to pick up these shipwrecks at depth, which is quite fun. Okay, so J3. J3 is the boat that I'm going to go on and talk about. It was seen as a target in this SSBI stuff. And it's a very small target. So it was only about 3 meters long by about 2 meters wide when we measured it in the data. And it's also buried beneath about 3 meters of sediment. So you can't see it from the surface. It's a small target. So therefore it was selected for excavation, as a way of testing whether the sonar data that we were looking at could actually reliably help us find these sorts of small boats. So excavations obviously took place. So it's within the bathymetry, the multi-beam. And the thing that you can see here, you probably can't see it from there, but this is a very small Second World War fighter plane that landed on the harbour and sunk in that direction. So it's a kind of really good marker for where we are. People dying on it today. The issue, though, the reason why I've got the stratigraphy here is also to say that actually archaeological stratigraphy in harbour contexts like this are quite difficult sometimes to excavate. So this is a kind of section, and you can see all the different kind of strata through it. But this is from a very sheltered area of what's called the Pisidium, which is a little island that's attached to the mainland. And elsewhere within this, the sea actually removes a lot of stratigraphy. And then also in harbours, you get things like dredging, which removes things, and that kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons why small ships, small boats don't reappear. The stratigraphy that we found around J3, there's not a huge amount of it, but there is a bit there, and enough encapsulating the wreck to help us date it. And I'll kind of go on to show you a few things about that. So excavation, that's the next stage, is you shove divers into the water and you do full-on excavation. So these are my colleagues. This is Alexander Beloff and David Honore, who are both maritime archaeologists. They are excavating on, this is J3, this is the rear of it, the stern. And it gives you an idea of something of the cloudiness of the water. effectively and the murk within which we work. It's a pretty typical excavation. What Alex is doing, and actually David, although you can't see it quite as well, is they're just scooping the clays within which have oozed around the ship into this thing. This is our water dredge. So effectively, this sucks up clay and takes it away. So it's a very similar sort of process than we would excavate on land. And then this is our 3D ortho mosaic of the ship. So you can't see it like this in real life. It's much too murky. But the ortho mosaic is a really good way of conceptualizing it for us. So it's made out of thousands of individual photographs that have been stitched together. You can see it in 3D, which I'll show you in a moment. But it gives you the overall shape of the ship and the main features of it. So what you've got here is what's called a transom stern. So it's quite flat at the back. And it goes all the way up to a point. The keel of it is actually this bit. No, this bit, sorry, here. So it's sort of on its side. You've got a couple of features that I'll just point out now. You've got a rowing bench here and a rowing bench here, and then this thing, which is an enormous, I mean, it's 4.5 meter long ship, so it's a 2.5 meter long iron anchor, which has been carefully disassembled into its two constituent bits. So you've got the anchor bit here, and then you've got this piece, which goes in this hole to kind of create the anchor shape. And it's been disassembled, put in the bottom of this boat. The thwart, so the rowing bench, has been put over the top of it, and then it sailed off and sank in the Portus Magnus. So I'll just show you a very quick video. I hope this works. So this is Alexandria by night, and the lights in the water, that's our research ship, the Princess Duda. And this kind of shows you the process of excavation. So it's all three-dimensional photography, that is structured photography that's been done in this way. So the initial kind of clearance of the kind of the mobile sand off the top, and then the excavation of the boat itself. It's because it's quite a small boat. Actually, the excavation is quite quick in terms of days. So this is just it from the top. And you can see how the excavation progresses. The great thing about this is that it helps us visualize. It's dimensionally accurate, so you can use it to create all of the drawings that you need, and all of the plans that you need. And also you can go back to it and use it during post-excavation. So I used it to help me look at various features of the anchor. For example, my colleagues who wrote up the hull of the ship have used it to examine various features of that. So it's a really nice tool. And this way, having this kind of animation, which is developed by our photographer, Christoph Grozek, is just a great way of demonstrating the process of excavation, the shape of the ship, and those sorts of things to an audience. Okay, the thing about the ship is the boat. Sorry, I can ship. This little boat is that we've not been able at this point to do high precision radiocarbon on it. So we've been using actually the pottery that we've excavated from around the vessel to help us date the context within which it became deposited. And this is just an example of these are the bits of pottery that are essentially hanging around on the harbour floor at the time when the boat sinks onto it and gets encapsulated within the context around the boat. It has quite a long date range, so it ranges from the Augustan period up until the 3rd into the 4th century. So it's not great, but that's the kind of the layer within which the ship is located. There are ways that we can type this up, and I'll kind of get into those. Okay, hardcore nautical sort of nautical archaeology. So this is effectively the keel of the boat. I've put this in simply because it gives you a couple of ideas about the construction of the vessel, and it helps you think about what it's designed for. So the keel is it's only 8 centimeters long, but it's not a big boat. And the purpose of the keel is to help to create a stable vessel within the winds and the waves. And this works really quite nicely on our particular vessel. It helps us think about what it's designed for, because that's the point about the nautical architecture, is that various different boats, the shapes, the sizes, the construction methods, they're all done quite specifically so that they can, tell you about the function. This particular vessel is fabulous because we have the line of the keel, which is the sort of yellowy goldy line on the bottom. And then we have 14 lines of planking on the port side. And they go all the way from the keel right up to the very last, it's called the guardrail. So it's a complete section of one side, so we can reconstruct the entire vessel. The only bit that we really don't have is the prow of the ship, so the pointy end. But the rest of it, it's really nicely done. Each of these planks are individual pieces of wood. They're all joined together using what's called mortise and tenon joints. So this is a tenon. These little holes here are the mortises into which they go, and then they're pegged. So the pegs go through these holes, and it holds the boat quite rigid. It's absolutely typical Rome in its construction style. The amazing thing about this is that we have the rowing propulsion system from the vessel, and these things really don't survive very well in the archaeological record. So not only do we have those two rowing benches, but we have the thole pins to go with them. And these are the bits of wood that project out of the topmost rail of the boat against which the oars were tied. And we have 3 of those. And then we also have we have 2 surviving rowing benches and there's space where a 3rd rowing bench would be. So essentially you've got a little boat that has 3 oars on each side and possibly 6 rowers. So 1 person to each oar. So it's a light, fast rowing boat that we've got. Equally, the thole pins are amazing because they tell us so much about the selection of different types of timber. So the thole pins are made out of hornbeam, which is a really quite unusual choice. But the thing about hornbeam is it's it's a hard wood. It's a very finely grained hardwood, and it's a hardwood that takes a really nice polish. And so what this means is that as you row against it, the polish on it reduces the friction on the oar, and so it makes it all more efficient. It's kind of things like that that I really like. The other thing that we've got about the propulsion system is we've got this mast step. So it's this bit here with the hole for the mast, which is underneath the anchor, the arm of the anchor here. So it could have been rowed, but it also could be it could have a little sail and a rig associated with that. So what kind of boat is this rowing boat? And we can turn to the iconographic record for the Roman world to look at these things. And so here, this is a tugboat from the Isla Sacra in Ostia. So again, it has the flat transom stern. It has what would have been 6 rowers. It has a platform at the back, which ours has got. And it has a pointed prow, again, which ours has got. Could it be a tugboat? But then you look at Utica in Tunisia, and you've got the same sort of thing on a little fishing boat. And this is also echoed in this one here. This is from what's called the Althibouros mosaic in Tunisia, which is an amazing mosaic. It's got hundreds of, not hundreds, it's got 20-something ships on it of different sizes. Each of them have a name underneath them in Latin, picked out in the mosaic. This one is a Heracleion. And so that's entered into the literature. So boats, small boats with a transom stern and a pointed prow are called Heracleion. So ours is possibly a Heracleion, but does that make it a fishing boat? Because this one is, and this one is. But then we can also look at this thing. This is the Torlonia relief from Portus again. And you've got 2 little boats. So you've got a little ship's boat here and a little ship's boat here. So there's this ship which is unloading at the quayside. So you've got a stevedore here carrying an amphora, I think, off. And this is the transom stern here, and it goes to a point. So this is the point, and this is the transom stern here. So could our boat be a ship's boat? And I think it is. And I'll go into reasons why I think it is. But this is the mosaic of the ship Europa, which comes from Pompeii. It's a graffito from the imaginatively named house of the ship Europa. And this was drawn, well, scratched into the painting, into a white painting in the house, probably by somebody who actually knew what they were doing in terms of the nautical architecture. So the ideas about the rigging are really good. The shape of the ship beneath the waterline is really good. You can see here it's sort of tied up against this this dock structure with the person at the end of it, and it's got a ship's boat at the back. And it's this type of boat that I think that J3 is. So why is it this? And we can go back to the anchor within this. Why was it actually carrying an anchor? Well, one of the functions of a ship's boat is to do what's called anchor work. So when your ship is becalmed, or if your ship is in a port, there's a thing called kedging that you can do. And basically this is you put your ship's anchor within your ship's boat. The ship's boat rows it out to a particular point. They chuck it overboard, and then it's still attached by a rope to your ship, and then your ship pulls itself towards the anchor. So it's a way of moving without using sails or without tugging, using a tugboat or using your ship's boat as a tugboat, which could also be done. So it could be that. The anchor itself is also quite interesting for people like me, simply because they're a bit like pottery in that they're dateable. So this type of anchor, which is called a lunate anchor, is dateable. You get examples in the Mediterranean that date from about the 2nd century BC through to the 4th century AD, which kind of fits within the time window of the pottery. But this specific one has a lump at the end. And the lump at the end indicates that it's a kind of crown stock, which means that it would have had a loop attached to it. And the loop attached to it, what happens there is that you tie a rope around it, and then the rope has a buoy on the top of it, and the buoy goes to the surface. And if you want to retrieve the anchor, you sail out to you row out to the buoy in your little boat, you pull on the rope, the anchor unseats itself, and then you hold it up. Those sorts date from somewhere around, they sort of end around the 2nd century AD. So again, that tightens the dating. We can also use the anchor to tell us what size of ship it came from. So that anchor is far too big to be on a little boat. The little boats have little anchors. Strangely enough, big ships have big anchors. So there is a kind of rough correlation between the two. And this is a graph that one of my old graduate students did, Greg Vitruba. And what Greg did is there's a whole series of anchors that have been measured, and they relate to a particular size of ship. And so you can take the dimensions from your anchor and plot it into his graph, and that kind of gives you a rough indication of the size of the ship that anchor was designed to hold. And in this case, it's about one that's about 25 meters long and carries about 100 tons of cargo. So this is a bit bigger than your average sized merchant ship from the Roman world. So that gives us an idea of the type of ship, the size of ship that it comes from. In terms of, again, anchors are a bit like pottery. They're also regionally specific, as well as being temporally specific around the Mediterranean. So this is a distribution map that Greg produced of these sorts of anchors. And you have a distribution which is largely to the south of France and bits around the Tyrrhenian Sea, and also off Alexandria. So you've got kind of both ends of a sailing route, if you want to think about it like this. But it's certainly, the majority of them are in this kind of Western Mediterranean region. And that could also suggest a kind of home port for our little ship's boat. And we can investigate that further by looking into the wood from which the ship is made. As you can see from this image, the Mediterranean, you don't get the same trees everywhere. You get slightly different groups of species in different areas within it. Within this, there have been 4 specific studies of ships that have looked in detail at the dendrochronological makeup. Well, no, dendro makeup. So you've got a group off the south of France, you've got a group in the Tyrrhenian Sea of Italy, you've got a group in Istanbul, and obviously you've got the Egyptian ships. And what we can see from this is that J3 isn't made from local Egyptian species. So this is these are all the different species that are used to make this ship. They're quite carefully chosen. So it's Roman boats and ships, typically they have hardwoods for the keel and for the frames, and then softwoods for the planking, and this is exactly what this has got. But it's the specifics in the use of different woods which is really interesting. So the fact that cypress is used is particularly significant, simply because it's not used in the Eastern Mediterranean until studies have shown it's much more kind of late antique, so Byzantine into the medieval period, that you're getting the use of cypress. Equally, ships off the coast of France don't use cypress at this time either, but ships from the Tyrrhenian Sea do. In a similar way, ash. So the whale is made of ash, and the various frames are made of ash. No, the whale is made but ash is used for also the keel. So ash isn't used in shipbuilding that much in either the Eastern Mediterranean or the group in France. But again, it's used much more commonly in the Tyrrhenian Sea. So it's these kind of subtle differences in the selection of timbers that help us think that actually this could be made in Italy. So it's very similar in its construction to the boats that are found in Pisa, the small boats that are found in Pisa, the small boats that are found in Ostia. Not quite the same as the ones that are found in Naples, but similar. So it's within that region, I think, it comes from. And it seems to fit also within the anchor kind of picture that I talked about. So what we have effectively for J3 is a small ship's boat that kind of sails around the Mediterranean, being towed on the back of these big ships. It probably comes from a medium to larger size vessel that is sailing from Ostia or Dabii, somewhere like that, to Alexandria. So it's not necessarily part of the grain fleet, but it may well be part of, it may well be trading in other things. So the other little boat that I'll talk about very, very briefly is one that we got from Tonnis Heracleion. Tonnis Heracleion is part of this submerged landscape that you can see here. It's just about 20 kilometers along the coast from Alexandria, and we're looking at that one too. This is just the bathymetry of the area of Tonnis Heracleion. So what you have is a big sand dune, which protects a harbour where you've got settlement. This is the canopic branch of the Nile. So you come in and you sail into its sheltered anchorage, effectively. This is a map that is the result of about 20 odd years work by my colleague Frank Gaudio, and basically is a palimpsest of everything that is happening here. So these are the main temples that we can see within this submerged city. It's put all together. So this is the earlier city that is there in the Saite period. And then around 450 to about 380 BC, the sea level rises and the temple starts getting swamped. And so they move from here to here. And in addition, this silts up, which is their exit to the Nile. And so they start coming in here. So this port becomes more important. So the city kind of changes around as we see it. The ship 11, which is what I'm going to talk about, is discovered here. This is the western end of what we call the Grand Canal. And it was discovered actually during prospection, which is where the diver kind of goes along and prods the seabed with a stick. It looks a bit like a fencing saber. And the idea there is that it penetrates through the sandy layer and then it hits on things. And we're specifically looking here for large limestone blocks, which tell us that there are temples, because that's what they're made out of, or anchors, which tell us we're in the water. And so when you find one of these, you kind of clear the sand away and look at it. And occasionally, while you're doing this, you find shipwrecks. So doing this, using this technique, they've discovered 75 ancient ships, which is the biggest concentration of shipwrecks from the ancient world. One of which is ship 11. These aren't all shipwrecks. So this lot here are a group that have been discarded. So this is what's called a ship graveyard. This lot are, this is a pontoon bridge, or the remains of a pontoon bridge. This lot is being used in extending a wharf. There's a few ships that actually are wrecks that are destroyed as the temple collapses. There's an earthquake which results in the temple collapsing in the 2nd century BC. So they're proper shipwrecks. And then there's ship 11, which is unusual in that it's small and it's far away from everywhere else. So it's not part of the usual patterns of deposition, which made us think about excavating it. I should say also the little blue dots are the anchors. We've got over 700 of these things as well. So again, Greg, my student who looked at anchors for his thesis, found about 1,500 published anchors from the entire Mediterranean, from the Bronze Age to about 1500 AD. So we've got like 700 from that probably go from about the 6th century BC to about the 2nd century BC. So there's a just enormous, amazing. Anyway, this is ship 11 and we excavated it. The thing about this particular ship is that it had a hole in it, either the bow or the stern, we can't really tell. And one of the planks of the keel had been very carefully removed. It had been sawn. So we've got the saw marks on the tenons. So they'd sawn down the plank and we just removed it. So it had a hole in it. And it had been carefully placed in a specific location, which was kind of odd. And so we tried to work out exactly why. And the idea of the West is important within this, and the wood which is made of is important within this. Now, the West in Egyptian mythology is associated with the afterlife, with death. And so, for example, you live on the east bank, further down in the Nile, you live on the east bank, and then when you die, you get put on a little boat like this, and you get taken to the West Bank, where the embalming halls and the tombs are. So the West is the direction of the afterlife. And this is part of Egyptian cosmology. So the sun rises in the east and it travels on its course during the day and sets in the West. And then it dies and it goes through the underworld and it is reborn again in the east. So it's those sorts of ideas that we're kind of playing here. We can look at various sorts of Egyptian tomb things. And this is that idea about going from the East Bank to the West Bank and how it's all associated with death. And it talks about a thing called the Neshmet bark, or the Neshmet bark of the West, which is kind of what I think ship 11 is. And I'll show you very briefly why. Firstly, it's the wood that it's made of. It's made entirely out of a wood called sycamore fig, which is quite unusual in Egyptian shipbuilding. It's a native species, but it has a ritual and symbolic importance in Egypt as it's a wood that's specifically associated with the god Osiris, the god of the dead. The branches get put on it of sycamore fig as he gets chopped up into different pieces, and then Isis, his sister wife, searches them all out, and she puts them all back together, and he wakes up again. The only bit that she doesn't find is his penis, which he makes from clay. And so sycamore is part of the ritual of rebirth and renewal. And that's kind of what you're also seeing here. There are ceremonies during what's called the month of Khoiak in Egypt, which is the month of the flood, of the inundation. So that's the rebirth of Egyptian life. And within that, they make a thing called the Osiris Sokaris figure, which is effectively a little corn bunny. So they make it out of silt from the Nile. They put seeds in it. They ritually water it. And then the seeds germinate, and that's rebirth, new life. They use a thing called a simpula as part of this. We found 120 of these things distributed around the waters of the Grand Canal. So there's clearly something ritual going on in their deposition. They're all placed in the same direction as well. So the bowl is in the same direction for each of them in this. It's a ritual that's a long-lasting one. So these are used every year in the construction of this mummy, and then perhaps they're deposited every year. It's strange. There's just some examples of them. We have loads. We used to get very excited when we found them, and now they appear. It's like, oh, that's another one, lovely. I've had a student who did a thesis on some of these things, and they come in very specific sizes as well. So there's a kind of long-lasting metrical system that's going on. And this is how they're sort of being used. They're being used in these ceremonies in Kowiak. And so one of them is all about offering to the god and to Osiris. So Kowiak is all about afterlife, all about resurrection, all about rebirth. And the Neshmet bark plays an important role within this. There are different ceremonies in which these ships, these little barks, are used. And one of the great ones is this. This is a thing called the Canopus Decree, which describes a procession from the temple in Tonnes Heracleion, which we have, to a temple in Canopus, which we have, along a canal, which we've also found. And so we can see this the in action playing out. And it's all about taking Osiris from Heracleion to the Assyrian. So one of these mummies from Heracleion to Canopus, where it's put in a special chamber within the temple. We also have things like this. This is a depiction of the sort of boat that ship 11 probably was, and you can see lots of the emblems. So the emblems are all about Osiris and his companions on these journeys. So these have been a massively well-decorated bark. And we found some of these bits of decoration in the waters of the Grand Canal, not around ship 11, fortunately. And it's highly likely that if it was decorated in this way, they were taken off and used to decorate the next version of this boat. But it clearly is a sort of ritual deposition. So it's carefully sunk between two little chapels on the banks in a ritual act. So basically, the ship's ballasted, it's put into position, and because it's a crescentic shape like this, the hole is at the top. The hole where they've taken a piece of the keel out is there. And so what you would do is you just walk along it and shift the balance of the boat, and then the water would come in, and then it floods that, and then it sinks. And we can see that in the way that the boat is kind of crumpled and settled into the seabed. There's part of it is deeper than the other. The thing is, so this is an official temple offering of a ritual barge that has kind of outgrown its use and has been deliberately sacrificed to the gods in a very specific location at the edge of the city towards the west, which is where the burials would have been. Associated with this are also a whole series of little deposits. So we get little stone plates, and on the stone plates there are usually a piece of lead, which is a metal that's also sacred to the god Osiris, which is usually screwed up. And then occasionally they come with bits of with animal bone with them as well. So whether this is an offering that has been placed by individuals around the boat as well, it's highly likely. This is one of the things that the Egyptians also did. So you have kind of private religion, private donations, as well as larger kind of temple things. Okay, so that's the two boats really. One is this ship's boat. That talks to us about trade. It talks to us about the movement of goods from Alexandria to Rome, and vice versa, on this kind of long distance trading voyages. And the other one in the Roman period, the other one is this little ritual vessel, which gives us another view into life in Egypt. This is probably in the early Ptolemaic period. So there's only a couple of hundred years that separate the two boats, but they give us very different views into the life of the city. We've only been able to do this because of our long-term partners in the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, whose project this is and that I'm part of, and Oxford's part of. And we're funded by a group called the Hilty Foundation, who essentially pay for me and the Centre for Maritime Archaeology, as well as paying for all of the excavations that take place. And we work entirely in partnership with the Underwater Antiquities Department of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. And it's without all of these people that enable me to stand, sit, and kind of talk to you about these ships and boats. They're entirely a teamwork, group of teamwork over a very long period of time. Fortunately, J3 was my lockdown project, and we've now got a draft of it, so we should be publishing it hopefully towards the end of this year. Ship 11 is something that's going to be published after that. So they're being turned into monographs here in Oxford. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have questions? Do we do questions?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for the talk and accepting our invitation. Normally, what we do is I kind of start a round of questions, also to think about questions they might have. Then our audience will type in some questions if they have some in the chat.
Okay.
Right. So I think I will start with one of my questions. I was just wondering, like, when you are doing this kind of underwater excavation, are the ships at some point also like taken out from the water, or that's not the case? Like at any point?
I would love to take them,
So it's not allowable.
but and this is the big but. What that results in is a massive long-term conservation plan. So you have, which is ridiculously expensive, and so we'd have to build in the lab in Alexandria. We'd have to build big enough conservation tanks in order to do the work with this, which there aren't at the moment. So what we've been doing is even though I said we found 75 of these things. Actually, we've only excavated 3 of them, and are trying to stay well away from kind of large-scale excavations of bigger ones. And so we excavate them, we record them like Ship 11, and then we rebury them, hopefully, so that they'll be preserved in situ. Hopefully.
So it might
It probably does, because you've disturbed the burial environment. But by that point, we've kind of preserved them by record, hopefully. But I absolutely would love to take them and to conserve it properly. But then you're left with a problem like the Mary Rose, in which case, you've got a 10-year conservation project followed by an ongoing conservation project that requires millions of pounds over the long term.
When you were presenting the first ship, you also showed us several times of boats. What are the differences between them? More stylistic or doesn't really make any difference?
Can you just repeat the question?
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Hang on. Shall I go back? Okay, so the question is, with this, whether the differences here are more stylistic than functional. There is a certain amount for ships or boats to perform their function. They have to be more or less fit for the purpose for which they've been designed for. So J3, because it is a ship's boat, it's also designed to work with a sail and at sea, so that's why it's got the keel. Whereas if it had been designed to work in a riverine environment, then the keel wouldn't necessarily be as pronounced. So it would be much flatter on the bottom, so it'd be easier to beach. whereas ship 11 from Heracleion, the idea there is that the stylistic design of an Egyptian ritual boat is crescentic in shape. And so consequently, it's made out of the keel is made out of different segments. It's 7 or 8 different segments of the keel, so that if you lay all the segments out, they're flat, but then when you join them all together and bend them up, it creates the crescentic shape. As a boat, that would be rubbish at sea. But as a ritual vessel, which is designed to sail around the kind of calm waters and canals, then it's perfect. So it's a kind of combination of the 2 factors. You kind of design the ship to do, or the boat to do the thing that you need it to do. And in terms of these, yeah, these are different little boats with a transom stern. The fact that they're all called Horea for me is probably the wrong application of a kind of, we're kind of grasping at an ancient Latin name and applying it to things that probably would have different names. So a ship's boat there's a whole load of different words for a ship's boat in Latin. That we could easily call it that. Okay.
You mentioned the bones of
yeah.
Do we know what animal it came from?
Okay, bones. The bones that were deposited around ship 11. At the moment, the bones are being studied by an Egyptian scholar called Salima Ikram. She does all sorts of bones. And so I haven't got we haven't got the final report of that yet. And what they seem to me to be are kind of cows. So they are kind of just normal offerings. Nothing we have elsewhere within at a place called Canopus, which is another city that we've also been excavating. It looks like there's a zoo there that has kind of gone under the waters, and there's all sorts of strange animals appearing out of that. We know in the Ptolemaic period, the Ptolemies had private zoos, and some temples have this associated with them, and it looks like one of these has collapsed. Anyway, but in terms of sacrificial animals, I'm not sure at the moment.
So I will just follow on the last question, why these differentiate between hot and fish boats. Where there's differences between them, large enough that fish boat was not invited,
exactly. No, I think boats can be very multifunctional, and especially this sort of vessel, these are just designed to kind of work in a local environment. So yeah, you might fish with them, you might take a bit of cargo across the port with them, you might go down the coast with them to the neighboring thing. Yeah, you would have used them for all sorts of different purposes. I think if you're building a tugboat, because there's more strain and stress on them, you might build it more heavily out of bigger bits of wood than a simple little fishing boat. But absolutely, there would be lots of these small vessels of this type would be multi-purpose.
I was just wondering if you dive, and if not, what the function of the diver is.
Okay, I do dive, and I dive. So I started diving because the things that I was interested in got progressively deeper, and so I started off by looking through a bucket with a glass end on it, and then I snorkeled, and then I dived. And I dive because it's better for me to excavate, to understand what's going on. And so it's why I went on the survey, because I wanted to see how the new machine worked. And so I sat and learned all about sonar. And so as a diver, yeah, you don't understand the environment and the constraints on you and the data that you've got unless you've kind of experienced that diving. So I had a couple of PhD students GPhil students who looked at one of them looked at lead objects that we discovered, and one of them looked at little statuettes that they discovered. And I sent them to learn how to dive. And they went to the Red Sea and dived in beautiful beautiful environments. And they never dived in Alexandria or in Heracleion, but the fact that they'd learned to dive enabled them to think about the underwater world so much better. So I think as a most maritime archaeologists, lots of maritime archaeologists do dive.
So you didn't know the background before Maritime. It was only sort of as your interest got deeper.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You did that.
No, and I don't dive for pleasure at all. When I was learning, I'd be, I was taken on a fish identification course, and then I got out to the water, and people went, "Well, what did you see?" And I went, "Fish." I don't know. And so I'm not great at that. And so others of my students they've come in through diving. They love diving, and that's, they dive every weekend if you let them, or if they could. Whereas for me, I dive on this site, and that's kind of that. Or in cold quarries in the north of England, when I need to remember how to dive before I go to Heracleion, try not to kill myself.
Yeah, I've got a question, and I think we also have some online. I don't know if okay. So you mentioned at the beginning that you sort of learned to identify all sorts of various features in the harbor. What sort of things besides boats were you identifying when you looked at the harbor?
Oh, okay. So So what sort of things have we identified in the harbour with the sonar? So this, for example, is Anti-Rhodus Island. So these little blobs on it are the remains of the Ptolemaic royal palace that has a colonnade of red granite columns which kind of face onto the harbour. This particular bit here turns out to be a temple of Isis, which there's an earthquake and the bank collapses and the temple flows into the waters, and so we have the kind of destruction horizon of the temples. So you can kind of reconstruct the structure of the harbour from it. What we do is there's a lot of work at a kind of reconnaissance level. So actually going and cleaning away the sediment and looking what's there. There's not a huge amount of full-on excavation, and because the idea is to kind of create an idea of what the topography looks like, and where the main buildings were, and how the port functioned, and then to now look for shipwrecks occasionally.
Sorry, what's the size of the picture?
Oh, okay. So let me see. So that's the the black thing or the white thing. Each of those is 100 meters. So you're looking at, say, 350 meters. So it's, these are substantial areas that we're looking at, and the harbour itself is something like 1.2 kilometers across. It's vast. So you can't excavate everything, and you have to be really systematic in where you want to look. And so it's all about using the resources that we have and the time that we have to answer the questions the realistic questions that we might want to pose, which is why there's so much investment in the technology, and so in the sonars and in the bathymetry and that sort of stuff, because they help to guide us. Do you know?
You said that ritual medicines just looked to one side.
Yeah.
Is it used to?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So it's within about where it's it's right at the end of the waterway. So the priest or whoever was in charge of sinking this particular vessel, either or stepped onto a little boat that was next to it and got away. Yeah, nobody went down with the ship in that case.
Money is any symbolic Osiris,
Not do they have sea burials? So not really, I don't think. Most, because it's important within Egyptian religion to preserve the body. So that's the whole point of mummification, is so that your body can last forever. And so if you deposit it at sea, it kind of disappears. And so that's also why we think it's important that this particular boat is sunk in the west, at this transitional point between the inner city and what's called the Western Lake, because we think off in this western area is probably where the burials of Heracleion are, although we've not found them yet. So that's one of the big kind of missing things that we've got from Heracleion. Yeah.
Do you know about the property relations of these boats? Fishing boats, and the top boats perhaps, all authorities. Because you always earlier said that during lifespan, the sorts of things that also imply that they changed owners or boats rented by people to different institutions or issued pilots that to use their boats on set that long ship that's coming in. To have all infrastructure, I suppose, small boats, but
Okay, so the question is about about the ownership patterns of small boats in the ancient world. So things like tugboats, we know that at Ostia there is a guild of tugboats. And we know that there are certainly port authorities. So to leave Alexandria port, you have to have there's been papyri that have survived, not in Alexandria but elsewhere, that effectively have been permissions to leave for particular ships. So there are authorities to do that. So certain vessels are definitely under the authority of the port. They're probably, however, owned individually. So if you're a member of the guild, so the particular tugboat may well be owned by an individual person. And similarly with the little fishing boats as well, they're probably individually owned. Elsewhere, we know that the bigger ships are, sometimes they can be owned by the state. And so the rowing boat that goes with it may well be owned by the state as well. And in Heracleion as well, we know that the temples also have fleets, which are owned by the temples. So there are different patterns of ownership for these types of vessels. And would they be bought and sold? Yes, absolutely. So there is a market that we know of for vessels in the ancient world.
thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Very few people chat that thing.
Well, I'm glad that we could do it in this kind of hybrid way. I think that's it works. Sure.
Yeah.
Stop the share. Oh, right.
Should I?
Oh, do you want it ending? George, you want to? Then you can make it.